Hello, hi, welcome to my new little corner of the internet. I am so happy to see you. I have sat back, I have evaluated my 2024 reads, and I have officially put together my top 24 of 2024. And so I thought that we should go through them together. These ratings are not going to be synonymous with my Goodreads ratings. I was kind of looking through that and I was like, these ratings are kind of whack. And just because one book was a 5-star doesn't make it better than a 4-star. I feel like that doesn't really make sense, okay? But like a romance 5-star doesn't equal like a thriller 5-star. They're on different ratings. Not all 5 stars are the same. These are going to be my top 24 books of 2024 just based on how I feel about these books right now in this moment. So yeah, let's get into it. In 24th place, we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This was my book club's December book club pick and I actually really enjoyed it. I listened to the entire thing on audiobook and I think that's a really good way to go about it. This book takes place in a coffee shop that has one specific chair that allows you to time travel. So in the book, there's 4 short stories of 4 different people who are utilizing this chair. A couple of the stories did have me kind of like tearing up towards the end, which I feel like is really incredible considering how short each of the stories are. In total, this book is less than 300 pages. I definitely would recommend. I think the audiobook is a really good way to go. I definitely do think I'm going to continue listening to the series and pick up the second book, but yeah. In 24th place, we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold. In 23rd, I have The Summer of Broken Rules by K.L. Walther. I actually rated this 5 stars on Goodreads and I really enjoyed it. I think just reflecting back on my 2024 reads, I haven't thought about this book as much as I've thought about some of my other ones. It's a really sweet, wholesome romance. I think it does a really good job at balancing rom-com-y type romance and then also like having a character that has some depth. Our main character's name is Meredith. And in this book, Meredith has recently lost her sister and she's obviously grieving that. But the story here is that they are revisiting their family's vineyard that they visit every summer because one of her cousins, I believe, is getting married. So she's revisiting that. She's obviously grieving her sister. A lot of things are reminding her of her sister. And then also throughout this book, there's a game of assassin happening, which just kind of brings in the more like playful rom-com-y aspect to it. It is a YA romance. There's no spice, but I think this book is just a really good time and I definitely would recommend it for like summer read. On the same wave of summer romances, book 22 is Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. I really enjoyed this book as well. This is kind of another one that I think does a really good job of balancing a realistic character plot while having still some of those like rom-com-y type elements. This book also does follow a main character that's a little bit older, so I feel like that makes her feel more real. She's going through real things. She's trying to figure out what her place is in this world. She feels like her life is kind of a mess. And then there's this guy that she has a connection to who has actually been in love with her forever, but he's never said anything about it because he felt like he never had a place to. Then they basically have this just for the summer romance, this like momentary fling. It really is just such an interesting concept. I really like her writing. I definitely will be reading more of her books. Even though this one is set in summer, I feel like you can read it honestly at any time. The summer vibes weren't like too heavy in this one. So honestly, just go ahead and pick this up. I definitely would recommend it. Next book is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. I know you guys are gonna hate to see this so low. I loved this book. I think it was so sweet, so wholesome. I didn't give it 5 stars and I can't exactly remember what it was that like slightly took me out of this book. I probably will reread it at some point because I did thoroughly enjoy it. I also tabbed this one as well and there's plenty of tabs. I was having a grand old time. This is one of the few accidental pregnancy tropes that I've read and I know that that trope gets a lot of hate, but I enjoyed this one. I don't know why that trope gets so much hate. I haven't read one that I've disliked, but I also just haven't read that many of them in general, so that could be why. I think the male main character is what really sold me in this book. He is just so sweet, so wholesome. If you like a man who is words of affirmation, acts of service, so like golden retriever, you are gonna love our male main character, Beau. He is genuinely so sweet. I feel like that is really the cherry on top for this book is him, but I think this book still has a really cute plot. It was still really wholesome, especially for it being an accidental pregnancy, and I definitely will be reading more Hannah Bonham Young books, so I definitely would recommend picking this up. It has the hype for a reason. Next up is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I really liked this. I read The Naturals earlier in the year and I feel like I was looking for something that was kind of similar, and I feel like this is kind of as close as I've gotten. It follows our main character Pip, who is doing her senior capstone project, and she decides to reinvestigate a murder that happened in her town because she doesn't believe that the person who was accused is the person who did it. And then a lot of things kind of start unfolding. She's finding a lot of different secrets. Started reading this one as the physical copy and then ended up finishing it on the audiobook. And I will say that the audiobook is so good. I definitely think that's the way to go about it with this one. It is a full production. There's a lot of different types of media that happen in here, and the audiobook does a really good job at capturing that. It really feels like I'm just watching a documentary. Definitely would recommend reading this one on audiobook, but overall it's a really good read and I do plan on finishing the series in 2025. Number 19 is Swift and Saddle by Lila Sage. It actually pains me to have this so low. I don't know why, like, I just have a special place in my heart for this book, for these two characters. Lila Sage just does such an amazing job at writing characters that feel so real, but in such short books. Although this is a romance and it definitely is centered around romance, the characters are all kind of going through their own internal things. The female main character in this one is very made it on her own, only trusts herself. For all my Swifties, she's very much like Bolter energy. That's kind of how I describe her, but I really loved it. It's definitely like Black Cat, Golden Retriever Boy, and all of the tropes that were in here were just so cute. I definitely would recommend reading the Rebel Blue Ranch series. I read the entire series last year and freaking adored it. These will just always hold a special place in my heart and I love them so much. Next book is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This was my book club's, I think, September book club pick. It was the very first book that we read. The fact that we took on such a hefty book immediately, kind of crazy, but I did really like it. This is my first historical fiction, also my first Kristen Hanna read, but it will not be my last of either. I do plan on reading more of her books because I thoroughly enjoyed this. I think there was just so much value and depth in this read. I'm not a really big history buff. That's just kind of not my thing. I think that this book did such a good job about storytelling. And there's just so much that happens in this book, but everything felt so important. It really taught me a lot about women in World War II as well. I definitely would recommend this book. I also see that it's soon to be made into a major motion picture, which this book had me crying at the end, so I can't even imagine what the movie's going to do to me. I 100% think that you should read this at some point in your lifetime. Next book is Bad Blood by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is the last and final book in the Natural series, excluding the little novella that's at the end. Yeah, there's a little novella, so it's really just this portion. I think this was such a good way to end this series. This book was so complex. There was so many things happening, so many gears turning, but it was done so well. I really, really enjoyed this series. I gave it 5 stars as a series as a whole. This one wasn't my favorite out of the series, but I still think that it was done very, very well. You're going to see the rest of them kind of up there in the higher ratings. I feel like I'm kind of forgetting some of the details and things that happen, so I really do hope that I get to reread this in 2025, but I highly recommend picking up the Natural series if you haven't. The next book is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. This is a thriller, and I feel like this was really the turning point for me that thrillers are good. I was kind of losing hope, honestly, for the thriller genre. I was like, am I just going to feel like every time I finish a thriller? But no, because this one kind of redeemed it for me. I think that another reason that I did really like this book is because it almost felt like it had true crime elements to it, even though it really didn't. And I just love true crime mystery kind of stuff. This book follows our main character, Chloe, and when she was younger, a bunch of girls in her town went missing, and then her dad ends up actually confessing to those crimes. So obviously her dad goes to jail. She's kind of grieving that throughout the years. Flash forward to when she's a bit older, and all of a sudden, girls start going missing again. She just feels like somehow, some way this has something to do with her, but her dad's still in jail, so she's like, how is this happening? Why does this keep happening to me? And it was just so interesting. I finished it very, very quickly. It's included in Kindle Unlimited, and I did read it on my Kindle, but I definitely would recommend checking this one out, especially if you are a true crime girly getting into thrillers. I feel like this is a really good kind of crossover between those 2 points because she's following these active cases of the girls going missing. It was really just short, easy breezy, and just everything that I need a thriller to be. The next book is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is another one that I feel like it kind of hurts my heart to put it so low, but I genuinely did really love this book. I feel like her writing is almost like poetic. I know that this book is categorized as like a romantasy, but it really is not that in my mind. I feel like it is a wartime romance because that's really what's happening, not super heavy on the fantasy element. So if you're going into this thinking that it's going to be a high fantasy book or that it's going to be a really complex world, it's not. Don't go into it with those expectations. Think of it as a wartime romance, and I promise you, you're gonna love it. Next book is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This was my first Ali Hazelwood book that I read, and she did not disappoint. I also just love this MMC. I don't know, he was tall, he was broody. It was a little bit of fake dating. I read a lot of fake dating this year, actually, coincidentally, not on purpose. I think I literally read like maybe 6 fake dating books. Nonetheless, I really enjoyed this book. It's so cute. Ali Hazelwood is a popular author for a reason, and I feel like this book is exactly why. I also read The Love Theoretically, and I know that most people prefer that one, but I actually prefer this one. I just think something about it just itched my brain. I don't know. I loved the little fake dating trope. I loved the characters. I think this is just one of those, like, I had a great time kind of romances, and so I loved it for that. Speaking of romances that were just a grand old time, The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. This actually felt like I was watching a movie in my head. This felt so summer rom-com. Like I could see this on my screen. I don't know if this is gonna ever get adapted, but it needs to because literally I can see it. I did go to her meet and greet and we got like a little character card. So I feel like it did help that I had literal visual evidence of what these characters looked like. This was another fake dating book. Actually, not only fake dating, fake marriage. But I loved it. There's a little bit of spice, but it's not overdone. Like it hits all the tropes. It did everything right. It is just such a good time. I definitely would recommend reading this one in the summer. I feel like the summer vibes are really good in here. This was just another Christina Lauren hit for me. Nothing surprising here, but I did absolutely love it. And the last book before we get to our top 10 that I have is Killer Instincts by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Now, I need to make a little disclaimer. When I think about the Natural series, I feel like this one is my favorite, okay? I didn't rate it higher than some of the other ones. That is why I think I need to reread the series, because I think that somewhere we got lost in translation, because I feel like in my mind when I think about it, this is my favorite, but why is it not rated the highest? I don't know, and I don't really want to say anything because I feel like anything I say is a spoiler. If you're watching the video at this point and you haven't already purchased the Natural series, what are you doing? Because I loved it and you need to read it. If you're still watching at this point, that means that we have officially made it to my top 10 reads of 2024. Honestly, deciding the order of these was really difficult. This was really just in the moment I stared at the books and decided where they're gonna go. But this is not concrete. I feel like all of these are number one in my heart. So let's go through them. In 10th place, I have One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I love this book so much. I think that it was a really well done fantasy. The world is not too complex, but it is very interesting. It's a very unique magic system. I read this during a 24-hour readathon, and after the first 100 pages, when my brain started to figure out what was going on, this breezed by. It was clicking. I was loving it. And I do plan on rereading it this year so that I can get into Two Twisted Crowns immediately. This is a duology. One Dark Window is the first book. Two Twisted Crowns is the second book. And if you plan on reading them, read them back to back. Do not take a break. That was my mistake. I made that mistake. I did it so you don't have to. I'm telling you right now, you need to read them back to back. The world is very simple, but there's a lot of characters, and when you're reading it, it's really easy to keep track of, but once you've exited the world and try to put yourself back in, I got a little lost. That might have just been a me experience, but I feel like it is best to just read them back to back, so I do plan on rereading One Dark Window in 2025 so that I can then read Two Twisted Crowns, but this 100% needed to make it into my top 10 because I just loved this entire world and the writing so much. 9th place, the Fck Series. I've raved about this one on TikTok. I usually don't do like solo book reviews, but I did do it for this one. Technically it's a series, so it's not just a solo book review. It's 5 books. If you get the physical copy, you're gonna get all 5 books into one because they're just like short little stories, but they are so good. This follows our female main character who is a serial and then a male FBI agent. You get introduced to it as a romance, but it really does have a lot more depth to it than just the romance. It's definitely a very gruesome book. There's a lot of like really vivid details, so I definitely would be wary of that. If you are a Criminal Minds girly, you are going to love this series. Like I think it just hits all of the spots. Thriller, true crime, romance. It just did everything for me. I really, really loved it, and I definitely will be rereading this series as well. I think about her constantly. In 8th place is Picking Daisies on Sundays by Liana Sincotti. This is another book that I talk about quite a bit. It's by an indie author, but I think she deserves all of the love. This is like pure romance. It is just wholesome romance. I absolutely love the MMC. There's a lot of romance books that I say I love the MMC, but I cannot remember their name. Levi literally does not leave my mind. I love this man. He is just so sweet, so wholesome. It is once again fake dating. It's not very long. It flies by. There's also a little bit of a shock factor, a little bit of like a moment of men like this don't exist, quit playing with me. This is such a romance book of romance books, but I genuinely did love this book so much and I highly would recommend. I hope that you love it if you read it, and if you don't, my ears are covered. I'm not listening to the slander. This book will always hold a special place in my heart, and I definitely do want to reread this one as well. In 7th and 6th place, these are kind of synonymous. They are part of the same series, so I'm just going to put them all as one. But Powerful by Lauren Roberts and Powerless by Lauren Roberts. Powerless by Lauren Roberts is one of the first books that I read in the beginning of the year, and I think it really kickstarted my love for reading. I know that this book is kind of a either you love it or you hate it. It was really hyped up on TikTok, so that opened it up to a lot of different opinions, but I am on the love it side. So sorry if you didn't like it. I loved this. It was such a good time. It was fast. It was quick paced. The plot is interesting. The romance is good. It's 2 brothers. There's so many tropes in it. I think that this is a really great book if you're getting into reading, if you want something quick, or if you're trying to get into thicker, longer fantasy books. This book is not super heavy on the fantasy elements, which I'm still kind of getting into fantasy. I'm not a super high fantasy reader, so I think that is why I enjoyed it so much. I think the banter in this book is just top notch. And if you read this book instantly, you're gonna go into powerful. Oh my gosh. I'm not going to tell you what this novella is about, okay? But all I'm going to tell you is that you're going to cry at the end. I read this book in a cafe at a table with a bunch of my friends. I was literally sitting there sobbing reading this book. Everyone's laughing at me. They're like, "Are you seriously crying at a book?" Yes, if you know what happens in this book, yes, I am crying at this book. It's freaking sad, but I loved it. It was so good. I think I could read a full book of this story. Didn't love Reckless as much, but I am excited for Fearless. Nonetheless, we'll be reading it. And I think she also mentioned a couple other novellas. I really don't know who those could be about, but we'll be reading them. I've also met Lauren Roberts. She is so sweet, so like bubblegum, and I just love these books so much. We are officially at the top 5. Genuinely do not know how I put these in an order. This order is not concrete. Like I said, the top 10 wasn't concrete, but the top 5 is really loosey-goosey because honestly, all of these books are number 1 in my heart, but let's just go through them. Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. I feel like there's no way you haven't already heard of this book, but you know what? Let me tell you about it again because I loved it. This was my first ever Christina Lauren read, and I'm so glad that I did decide to read it. It is a childhood friends to strangers to lovers. It flips between the past and the present, and the characters and the story was just so wholesome and sweet. Something about the writing just like does it for you and just makes you feel so like in there with them. There is a little shock at the end that actually had my heart hurting. I really liked this story. I think it's very wholesome, but I think that there's also a lot of depth to it. There's also some cute romance in there as well. And another Christina Lauren win for me. Absolutely adored this. Just such a good book. Next up is Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage. I was highly anticipating this book. When you start reading the first and the second book, you get like little teasers of these characters. And if you're paying attention even just the slightest, you know that you want to see this book and these characters together. And I absolutely loved the chemistry, loved the banter. Once again, Lila Sage does such a good job of writing characters that you feel like are real, even though it's such a short book. So I really just felt like I could connect to these characters, and then the romance between them was just so cute. It's an enemies to lovers forced proximity situation. You could read this book on your own, but you definitely should read the first 2 books before you read this one. I think you'll just love this one even more if you read the other 2 first. As far as romance goes, this is my favorite series for sure. I realized at some point I dropped this book on the floor and forgot to talk about it. So we're actually just gonna put these both at number 3. One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid and Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I feel like this is the more popular book out of the 2 for good reason. It is a very well done book. The plot of it is so interesting. It basically follows our main character who marries her high school sweetheart, and then on their first anniversary, her husband actually goes missing in a plane accident, and she is devastated. She's obviously grieving for years and years, and they just cannot find him. Eventually, years later, she finally moves on and gets engaged to somebody else, and then all of a sudden her husband reappears and she does not know what to do. Truly just had my mind so puzzled. Taylor Jenkins Reid is another author that I feel like does a really good job at writing really real characters in such short, sweet books. It was one of my first books by her. I read 3 more of her books instantly after because I was like, no, I'm obsessed with this. And so I definitely would recommend checking out her books. They are so encapsulating, which brought me to the next book I read by her, and that is Maybe in Another Life. The book is another story that has a really interesting premise, really unique plot line. It follows our main character who basically gets to live out 2 alternate timelines based on a decision she makes. I feel like that's a really unique plot that I just haven't read about, and there's a lot of character growth and development that happens in this. I think for some reason I just like this one a little bit more. Maybe it's because people aren't talking about it as much, so I feel like it deserves a little bit more love. So I'm just like, here, let me shove it in your face so that I can give it the love it deserves. But I really did enjoy both of these, and I definitely would recommend picking up a Taylor Jenkins Reid book if you haven't already. In spot number 2, we have Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. This is the ultimate rom-com in a book. If you are a romance movie lover, you are going to love this. It is YA, there's no spice, but honestly, I didn't even care. I'm not a big spice reader in general, but this book just felt like such a warm hug. My boyfriend bought me this book a while ago and I hadn't read it. And then my best friend read it before me and she was like, girl, you need to pick up that book. So I did, and I'm so glad I did. I was texting her while I read it and I was literally like, why am I giggling and kicking my feet right now? I was actually sitting in my bed just like I looked like a freaking child reading this book. I was just so giggly and just like caught up with the plot and the premise. I absolutely love this book, and I definitely would recommend if you're just looking for like a good time. And my number one book of the year for 2024, I did decide to go with The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I don't know if this book is my number one out of all of them, but because it's the first book, it has an extra special place in my heart. I feel like had I not read this series, I might not be on the reading journey that I am now, because this really just made me fall in love with reading interesting books, reading fun books. It was so fast paced. The plot is so interesting. There's so many different components that this book hit. There's true crime, there's mystery, there's thriller, there's found family, there's a very slight romance subplot. It really just hit every single thing that I needed in a book, and this series is definitely a 5-star series. I would highly recommend, if you can't tell by me raving about it this entire video pretty much. And when I think back to my reading year in 2024, I feel like this is the first book that comes to mind is like, yes, absolutely freaking loved it. So I definitely would recommend picking up the Natural series if you haven't already. So there we have it, my top 24 reads of 2024. I had such an absolutely amazing reading year, and I cannot wait to see what this year has in store. Let me know what your favorite read of 2024 is, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!